Hello everyone, Shen Thomas here. We're gonna do some more individual stance explanation on these Shaolin stances, what I call the 8 element. And they're basically the 8 most common stances used in Shaolin Kung Fu, okay? There are a few more that are a little more obscure, okay? There's probably more like 12 basic stances, but the 8 that are used mostly, right, that are most practical to use, we've already gone over Mabu, horse stance, which is Ka'un or earth. We've done Gongbu, which is Chen or thunder, and that's forward stance or bow stance, and those are the main two. And then we've gone into cat stance or Mabu, which is a narrow upright stance that's more for a on guard stance, right? And then that was Li or fire. So we've done earth and thunder and fire, okay, or Ka'un, Chen, and Li, okay. So now we're going to do lake or Tui. So lake is actually what they call Jubu, and they have some ridiculous versions of this stance in Wushu that they use that are way too low and way too awkward to even be able to be used in self-defense, okay. But what it's called in the Shaolin is called empty stance, okay? So when we're in the cat stance, we have a little bit of a bend, and the front toe is pointed, no weight on the front foot. So it's kind of like an on-guard forward stance, okay? So we can kick, and then we can transition into other stances, right? Well, the Jubu, empty stance, is basically this cat stance, but both legs are bent and we're much lower, okay? And this front leg is still empty, okay? So it's kind of hard to get into this stance because we're actually bending the knee that all of our weight's on and then having the pointed front leg, okay? That is just like the cat stance or Li, right? But because we're lower and it's bent more, then it has more of a bent angle, okay? So Jubu, or empty stance, is usually used when an attack comes in, right? And we're forced back, okay? So it can also be used that when we get pushed, we can go empty and we can let some of that power that comes into us, we can let some of that power go by sinking on one leg and almost revolving around the power, okay? So in Shaolin, you'll often see an on guard, like a cat stance with a kick or something, moving into a Gongbu, maybe moving into a Mabu, and then maybe moving back into a Jubu, okay? And quite often you'll see a Jubu where they'll move to the side in Kung Fu. In different styles of Kung Fu move to the side, and they're using that empty stance that way, okay? So empty stance, or Jubu, when it gets forced back, like if you're in this projecting Gongbu, sometimes you'll get forced back onto that back leg, and when you get forced back, then you can use that front leg to kick. So it's almost like they're pushing you back and you're able to kick with the front leg now. And then again, transition back into, you know, Mabu, Gongbu, and Jubu. So from my Jubu training, it's actually helped my Wing Chun a lot. Because when I'm doing Wing Chun and an opponent comes in and they collapse me and they really move me, I'll go empty. So then my forward stance in Wing Chun, which is here, becomes a Jubu, all the weight on the back leg. And I'll actually absorb with the front leg and move back. And then I'm able to come right back in the Wing Chun. So actually learning these Shaolin stances has really helped my Wing Chun. Because what you find out, in Wing Chun we have our goat riding stance that is preparing us to use the forward stance with that bent leg, okay? So basically in Wing Chun, this becomes both Gong Bu, right? And it also becomes Jiu Bu when we need it to, in the split of a second, right? So that's the amazing thing that Jiu Bu teaches you, is how to become empty in the front and solid in the rear. And then how to project off of that power that's in the rear, how to project back forward, and then also how to go empty. So that's why it's called empty stance, okay? So if somebody comes forward and say I block it to the side, and then they come back from the side where I blocked it and they bring it back into me, then I can actually go empty. Where I was just full, where they thought they'd get me, I could rotate and become empty. So then that's the empty stance, or Jiu Bu. And the reason why I think of it as lake, okay, is when you come back and you're empty, it's like part of you is a mountain, but part of you is a bowl of water that's empty. And so I think of it as a bowl of water or lake sitting on a mountain. Okay? So that way when they throw power at me, then it gets plunged into this lake or splashed to one side or the next because it's empty, and then I become full again. Okay? So also if they grab me, I'll move back and I'll pull them into that lake, and then I'll come forward again. And we have almost the equivalent in Wing Chun or Chum Kiu, where we'll come back and we have two Tan Saos that pull people down, and we do two Bong Saos that actually fling them off or forward. It's a very similar principle of back and down into emptiness and then fullness coming forward, okay? So anyway, I call that one lake because it feels like a body of water suspended by a rocky mountain, but it's empty, it's deceptive, okay? Where we can pull people back into that lake and then hit them again with thunder, okay? So again, that stance, we have a 45-degree angle, and the foot comes in front. So it's just like our cat stance, but we lower both. So it almost widens a little bit more and it lowers, okay? So you'll see in wushu or other styles that they'll go extremely low, but then they'll bend the spine forward to like counterbalance, right? And it's just ridiculous because it's hard when they go that low, it's hard for them to come back. And what we want to be able to do is come back and be empty and then full. Empty and then full very quickly, right? So again, there's different versions of empty stance that are used in Kung Fu, and quite often they might whip something to the side, kind of like a Tai Chi single whip, right? Where they'll use both hands as kind of like an on guard, right? But for the most part, its power is to pull things down and in, and to get ready for a projection forward, or if somebody grabs, to go to one side and kick, or to go to the other side and kick, okay? So that's empty stance. And again, having no weight on the front foot, then it makes it real easy to bring the leg up to kick, okay? So thanks again for joining me.